Can you predict when bad things will happen to your health? It's a question worth billions of dollars. Companies want to sell you tests that measure your biological age. Doctors want to calculate your risk of a heart attack. Genetic tests promise to tell you if your dementia is in the future. But here's what nobody's asking. Even if these predictions are accurate, can you actually do anything about them? Today, we're going to explore which prediction tools are backed by real science that can help you live long and well, and which ones are just expensive fortune telling. Welcome, my dear listeners, to episode 63. The million-dollar question: which health predictions actually help you live longer? Or can we predict and avoid bad things happening? There was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal where the author looked at a few longevity calculators, or how long she might live. The article focused on how much money she needed in retirement. It's a good question. It takes less retirement money if you die at age 79 than if you live to be 100. The Social Security calculator estimated she would live to 86. Other calculators ranged from 90 to 102. So for her, the question about how much money she needed in retirement, the calculators weren't very helpful. I got to thinking, as doctors, we work with patients to help them live long and well. And sometimes there are risk prediction tools that we use. And increasingly, we hear in media and social media about biologic age clocks. Just spend $500 on a blood test and you can learn whether your body is younger or older than your actual chronologic age. So broadly, do any of these tools work? Can they actually help us to live longer? By the end of the episode, I hope that you will have a better sense of, would knowing your risk of heart disease or dementia be helpful? How to separate what helps from what's hype? And should you consider paying for a test of your biologic age? I also wanted to share with you the early results of my poll on what we should call you, my listeners. So far, N of One Nation is in the lead, but there is interest also in outcome optimizers and health warriors. Send me a note with your vote. I am fortunate once again to have Dr. Anthony Pearson, a cardiologist and author of the Skeptical Cardiologist Substack. Do sign up for it. Dr. Pearson joined me on episode 46 about reducing our risk of stroke, and in episode number 37, reducing our risk of heart disease. Welcome back, Dr. Pearson. How are you today?
I'm good, Bobby. Thanks for inviting me back. It's always a pleasure to be here with you on the podcast, and I'm excited to talk about our topic today.
Wonderful. I'm excited to chat as well about an important topic. Today, we are going to explore tools that predict heart disease events or death, likelihood of getting dementia, and the new biologic age clocks. Spoiler alert, biologic age clocks are not ready for prime time. Please save your hundreds of dollars. By the end, I hope that you'll have a better sense of what tools might be right for you and what questions you might ask before using one of them. As Dr. Pearson and I explore this topic, some of the questions that you might think about: are the folks talking about the prediction tool selling something? The test itself, ways to improve the test results like supplements for your mitochondria? Is the predictor a research tool to help us understand aging, or promoted as a way to live longer? Before we dive in, I wanted to share a really interesting study that relates to why I do this podcast and what I hope you, as my audience, gain from it. You may have heard the saying, believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. Now, it's not clear if it was Ben Franklin or Edgar Allan Poe who said it first, but it's relevant to what I want to share with you. The research study asks the question, in YouTube videos by doctors, how much of what they say is based upon evidence? Guess what they found? Now think for a moment. I'm going to pause. The researchers looked at 309 health-related videos on cancer, diabetes, and these were YouTube videos that had 10,000 or more views, and they were prepared by a doctor. What they found is that 62% of claims had little or no evidence to support them. So just the doctor's opinion, perhaps based upon some biologic mechanism or study in mice, but not based upon testing in people. Only 20% of the videos had high quality evidence. Here's something intriguing. The videos with the lowest evidence score had 35% more views, what we call eminence-based medicine or confidence-based medicine. Probably not surprising, since the doctor could just make a strong statement since there was no evidence required. Anthony, what are your thoughts about this study? Does it reflect your sense of podcasts and videos?
Yeah, it's a pretty good reflection. I think this is a Korean study, and I have no idea what the situation is like in Korea, but in the United States, these kinds of videos and podcasts are ubiquitous on the internet. And as the article notes, it seems like the wilder the claims, the more popular they are. It's hard for me to get a handle on how many people are taking medical advice from charlatans with entertaining videos, but not uncommonly, I'll talk to patients about why they are taking a certain supplement or why they're engaging in certain activities, and the source is often a YouTube video. That's something I don't understand, as I really don't like to get my information from videos. I like to see it in print. I think I absorb the information faster and better. And usually if you put something in print, if you're solidly evidence-based, you're providing links or references that support your position. If you're doing it on a video, you don't have to do any of that. I've been writing The Skeptical Cardiologist for about 13 years. And in my early years, I spent a lot of time kind of trying to debunk people like this. I described the number one red flag of quackery as kind of an unceasing goal of selling supplements or selling something, making money from these kind of false claims. And back then, a guy named Dr. Charles Gundry, his videos were popping up constantly when I was viewing things on the internet. And I feel he's a classic example of someone who has very low evidence but makes outrageous claims based on this minimal mechanistic evidence and no clinical evidence. And it's coupled with the incessant selling of supplements. And the problem is that Gundry, like many of these people, might have reliable references. He was a reputable pediatric heart surgeon, so it seems like he has a solid or authoritative scientific base. But his theories that humans weren't designed to eat grains, beans, or tomatoes because their gut lining is damaged by that are just totally not supported by science, and there's no evidence that his lectin blocking supplements help you in any way. The people like that are all over the place, and they're influencing my patients and my readers. I hear from them all the time. The worse the evidence, the more outlandish the claims, the more popular they are. There's a guy on YouTube named Ford Brewer. He's an MD, a preventive medicine specialist, who patients have pointed me in the direction of looking at his videos. His videos have titles like, I cleaned my arteries out in 1 year. And these are just unrealistic claims, but people seem to be attracted to them.
Well, I think it keeps you and I rather busy trying to present a much more fair and evidence-based approach. And so I hope our listeners kind of appreciate we are trying to come at this from an objective, defensible, and as Anthony mentioned, a reference-based approach so you can take a look for yourself and see if you agree with us. So keep this in mind as we work our way through today's episode. So try to do what I do, be an open-minded skeptic. And don't believe what you hear at first. What the evidence behind it is or isn't is what you really need to ask and think about. Okay, part one. What are risk equations and how are they developed? Risk equations help us predict whether you might have a heart attack or develop diabetes or get Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes these tools work. Other times, they don't. And importantly, with the results, can we do anything about it? To understand, we need to think about how these tools are developed. So, step one, find a database that has both the outcomes you care, like death or heart attack or dementia, and a bunch of clinical factors that might matter, like blood pressure or age or smoking. And we will start today with tools that try to predict a heart attack or death. So step two, look at the database and try to find correlations that suggest what might relate to what. Those who smoke were more likely to have a heart attack. Men were more likely than women. Those with a high LDL cholesterol similarly were at greater risk. Now, the granddaddy of them all was the Framingham Heart Study, which created a huge and influential database. The Framingham study began in 1945 when Congress authorized a study to find the risk factors for cardiovascular disease. At the time, half of all deaths were due to cardiovascular disease. Also at the time, it was felt that death from heart disease was essentially inevitable. We actually didn't know what caused it. The thought was that high blood pressure just came with age. Well, why in the 1940s? The catalyst was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's death from a stroke. It was not known what caused heart attacks or strokes in terms of who was most at risk. So the study collected information from folks living in Framingham, Massachusetts. By 1971, the data showed that high blood pressure was clearly associated with heart disease, both systolic and diastolic. At the time, only diastolic was theorized. Back to creating a prediction tool. After statistically analyzing the data in your database and finding factors that seem relevant, we move to step three. Use those correlations to build your prediction equation. So for the Framingham study, in 1998, the investigators built a risk prediction model that is pretty much in use today. How old are you? Do you have diabetes? Do you smoke? Have high blood pressure or elevated cholesterol and BMI? The tool gives you a 10-year risk. Now, there are newer and somewhat expanded equations since then, but many of the same risk factors are included. Step four, and this is almost never done. Does the tool tell us that we are at risk of a bad event, or does it provide ways to reduce that risk? Ideally, you'd find the risk factors like blood pressure or cholesterol, and then show in a randomized trial that improving the risk factor, like lowering your blood pressure, actually reduces your risk of the heart attack or death. Now, the cardiac event predictors tell us that high blood pressure, LDL cholesterol, high blood sugar are risk factors. And clinical trials have shown that improving those risk factors reduces our cardiac risk. So the factors are predictive and we can reduce our risk. But Anthony, these tools don't always work. And these databases sometimes come up with predictors that, frankly, we've then learned maybe aren't relevant. Some thoughts here from you?
Well, I totally agree on the value of the Framingham type approach for estimating the risk of what we call atherosclerotic heart disease, which is heart attack and strokes. It's something I think about on a daily basis as a preventive cardiologist. And I think we in cardiology are way ahead of other fields, other organs, specialties in terms of having very strong databases on risk prediction in the cardiac and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease in general. And for every patient that's in front of me, I want to be able to share a 10-year risk of heart attack and stroke and CV death. And we start with these population estimates. The factors that you mentioned that go into the Framingham study, we do have very good evidence for reducing high blood pressure, for lowering LDL, or a slightly better risk marker, apolipoprotein B, and for stopping smoking, trying to get rid of or reduce the risk of diabetes. So all of those things have been very well established. I think there are examples where we've identified a risk marker such as HDL, that seems to associate with a better outcome. But when we've actually done studies where we've raised the HDL, there hasn't been an improved mortality benefit, and there hasn't been reduced heart attacks and strokes. And then beyond that, personalizing, there's also genetic factors like lipoprotein(a) and looking at inflammation. So when we add in some more risk-enhancing features, we can become much more specific in terms of what your cardiac age is, if you will.
You made the point, and I totally agree, that the cardiac area of predicting bad things happening is way farther ahead and more based on rigorous evidence than really every other part of the body that we're trying to predict things. But even as good as it is, there's a cautionary tale. This next study shows us that these risk tools may be useful to understand what happens to thousands of people, but these tools may not be ideal for individual patients. So there was a really interesting study, and the study authors looked at folks with a heart attack and asked the question, would the risk predictor have predicted this event? So they had 465 people less than 65 years old who had a heart attack. And it turns out the tool said half of these folks who had a heart attack were supposedly at low risk. So our best prediction tools do miss many folks. Now, keep this inaccuracy in mind as we talk about the next set of predictors, because it gets a bit worse. All right, let's turn to part 2, the risk of dementia based on genetic testing. This is a critical issue. We all, as we get older, worry about the development of dementia, Alzheimer's, or other causes of cognitive decline. In episode 13 on can we reduce our risk of cognitive decline, I talked about the ApoE4 gene. It comes in 3 flavors, E2, E3, and E4. And we have 2 copies of the ApoE gene. Now, I got my results when I did 23andMe, but you can get this test pretty easily for about $100. Now, the E3E3 is the most common type, and that's in 60% of Americans. And that is associated with about a 10 to 15% risk of dementia by age 85. Now, if you're lucky to have the E2E2, perhaps risk falls in half, only 5 to 8% risk. Now for the E4 gene. You could have no 1 or 2 copies of it. If you have 1 copy, so your E3, E4, that doubles or triples your dementia risk, or about 20 to 25% risk. Now, if you have E4, E4, you have an 8 to 12-fold increased risk, or 50 to 65% by age 85. Fortunately, only 2% of the population actually has this genetic type. Now, it is the ApoE gene is an important risk factor, but it is not determinative, meaning it doesn't mean you're absolutely going to get dementia or not. Other variables can be added. Looking at amyloid or tau proteins is something people are looking at and trying to figure out if that helps us from a prediction standpoint. So here's a risk prediction tool that's pretty powerful based upon your gene type. You may have a low, moderate, or quite high risk of dementia. But this risk tool doesn't tell us what to do. We can't change our genes. Now, listen to my episode. You can double down on reducing your other risk factors like exercise, sleep, good blood pressure control, smoking, alcohol, or taking saunas. Anthony, what are your thoughts here? I know you've done some of this testing. Any insights for the audience?
Yeah, I've looked into this quite a bit, and I've become very interested in ApoE4 because it turns out I'm a carrier. I'm an E4-3, and as you said, that increases your risk of developing dementia 3 to 4 fold. So what the big question I think is, should we be doing something differently if we know we're an E4 carrier? If we did have a treatment for that, then as we do for, say, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, then probably everybody should be tested for E4 and identify that high risk early on. And in terms of it being a marker for, say, brain age, it's not really like that, but some companies now have started testing something called NeuroAge. Dr. Kristen Glorioso, who writes on Substack, runs a company that is devoted to testing NeuroAge, and it incorporates E4 and probably also amyloid tau proteins in the blood, which have some predictive value. And along with MRI findings, as we get older, our brain volume diminishes. And so brain volume is kind of a surrogate for brain age. White matter hyperintensities form more commonly as you get older. So there's another thing. So you can kind of put those all together and come up with something that you're calling a neuroage. What the benefit of that is not clear. We'd certainly like to diminish the advancement of our brain age, but I'm not sure that we have any proven ways to do that other than what you mentioned, which is mostly lifestyle factors, which are also good for cardiovascular disease and aging in general. I did a test that wasn't specifically on neuroage. It was basically your true age. And I think we're getting onto that next.
We are right there, ready to dive in. So I think you've introduced the concept of biologic age. So, part 3, measuring your biologic age. Now we get to an area where, in my opinion, marketing way exceeds the science. The hype is start by measuring your biologic age or the effective age of your tissues and use my test, the expert says. If your biologic age is higher than your actual age, then buy these supplements or do these hacks to improve that age. These are also called biologic clocks. And they're not inexpensive. As Anthony mentioned, True Age has a $500 test or a discount of $1,800 if you repeat it 4 times during the year. The crucial premise here is that aging is something you can measure in your tissues, not just on a calendar. If we find a driver of that aging or things that push your biologic age higher, we can then treat those factors. And when we treat them, we can show that the aging measure gets better and ultimately people live longer and healthier. Is your biologic age lower than your actual age? You've won the lottery. You're doing something right. Is your biologic age higher than your actual age? You need help. Now, the hope is real and the arguments make sense. but we are a long way from having a tool that works and can help us. Here's the dilemma. One, what should you measure to reflect how your body or tissue is aging? Problem number one, there are many targets, many approaches, many tests. Some focus on epigenetics or DNA methylation or DNA structure changes or proteomic assessments, those are blood assessments, or telomere length. It's not like measuring how tall you are, where many different approaches give you the same answer. Use a tape measure, a yardstick, or a ruler, you'll get the same height. So one test might say that your liver looks older than it should be, your heart might be younger, and your lungs are about right. Now, what do you make out of this information? That's problem one. Problem two, the tests give differing results for the same person. Now, to be helpful, you would repeat the same test another day and get the same result. Or you'd use a different test and find your biologic age and get similar results. Unfortunately, both of those characteristics don't appear to be true yet. In a study of the test's reliability, they compared results of 6 different tests in the same people and found 9 years differences. Problem number 3, and this is why I say these biologic clocks are not ready for prime time. No clock has been tested to see whether improvements lead to better outcomes. For our heart disease predictors, we know that high blood pressure or high cholesterol or high blood sugar increases your risk, and reducing those levels does reduce your risk. But for biologic clocks, there are no studies that show even if you could improve your biologic age, that will make a difference in what actually happens to you. My take is that biologic age is a fascinating research tool, but there's no evidence to support using them to live longer. From my viewpoint, save your hundreds or thousands of dollars for now. Anthony, what's your take on the biologic clocks? I'm a skeptic. I am an open-minded skeptic, but I come down on the side of, not ready for prime time. What do you think?
I totally agree with everything you've said. I have been very interested in them and checked out the true age that you mentioned there. And this is a test that's looking at DNA methylation. And there are big problems with the DNA methylation technology in terms of being something that consumers should be using or patients should be using. And that you outlined them pretty well. I would say, number one, no consumer-facing biological age test has been validated or approved by a regulatory body, not by the FDA nor any sort of independent group that can say with any level of confidence that the test is measuring anything relevant. Number two, there is no industry oversight or transparency on quality control. We really have no idea how these companies are doing what they're doing and getting the data back to you. So the test, the true age test, I spit onto a piece of paper and mailed it back to them, and a couple of weeks later, the only information I got was that my chronological age was 4.3 years younger than my biological age. And in terms
Oops.
of looking at where that came from, it's a black box. You have no idea. But even more importantly, if I were to repeat that test with that company and sent them the same sample twice, it's likely it would vary by anywhere between 5 and 10 years. Meaning, if I had sent them 2 samples, one would come back saying I was 4 years younger, and one would say I'm 1 year older from the exact same sample. So the variability in these clocks has been pretty well established, as you said, in an article, and there's various individuals online who have reported the same intense variability. on the same samples and is just too high to be meaningful. And the final thing is even if they were precise, that you could get repeated samples coming back with the same number, and if they were accurate, if they actually told you your biological age, they don't give you any actionable insights into improving your health. How can you make your age younger? Now,
And even if you could make your biologic age younger, what really matters is, does that mean you live longer? And those
yeah,
studies have not been done. And until they're done,
yeah,
it's a
these,
great research tool. And if it helps us understand aging a bit more, wonderful. And I'm sure it will lead to insights. But save your money. That's
yeah.
my take.
So there's a distance, like looking at DNA methylation might correlate with chronological age in some way. But the question is, does that correlation with the chronological age correspond to anything meaningful? And the other aspect of this is that it's definitely and in the end, we just don't have any evidence that it's working, that it's accurate, that it's useful, and it's probably just a big waste of money.
Expensive urine, as they say.
Yes.
All right, I think it's time to wrap up. Many of us would like to know if something bad is going to happen, especially if we can do something about it. For cardiac disease, I believe the tools can help motivate us to take care of the risk factors that we know matter. For dementia, you may or may not want to learn your genetic risk. If it just paralyzes you, then skip it. If it helps you to do more exercise or get better sleep, then great. The biologic age tools are conceptually interesting, but not ready for prime time. May you live long and well. And let me know your vote for N of One Nation or Outcome Optimizers or something else. And please tell your friends about the podcast and about the Skeptical Cardiologist, which is a great Substack newsletter. Until next time, take care of yourself and those around you.